Welcome to the Horizon Audiofiles, a podcast of the Defense Horizon Journal. The Defense Horizon Journal is a professional and academic journal that features essays, reports, and analyses covering geopolitics and law, security and defense policy, peace and conflict studies, applied military science, as well as developments in weapons technology. For more information, go to www.tdhj.org.
Episode number 95. Britain cannot claim restraint while enabling war. By Dr. Usman. Britain's false restraint in the Iran crisis. Britain's decision to allow the United States to use RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia for strikes linked to the Iran crisis has been defended as a narrow, defensive step. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also argued that British action must be lawful and tied to the protection of British interests. However, the legal and political picture is not identical in the two cases. RAF Fairford is a Royal Air Force station on sovereign British territory. Diego Garcia is more layered. Under the 2025 UK-Mauritius Treaty, Mauritius is sovereign over the Chagos archipelago, including Diego Garcia, and retains title to the land and territorial sea. At the same time, Mauritius authorizes the United Kingdom to exercise the rights and authorities it needs for the long-term, secure and effective operation of the base, including jurisdiction and control arrangements, and the treaty allows the UK to authorize the US to operate the base jointly with Britain. The UK government has therefore described Diego Garcia as a joint UK-US base over which Britain retains operational control, while the US State Department has said that Washington remains responsible for operating the US naval support facility there. So, the clearest way to describe Diego Garcia is not as a simple case of British ownership and American use. Iran understood that point immediately. Reuters reported that Tehran treated British base access as participation in aggression, and shortly after that, Iran fired missiles toward the joint US-UK base on Diego Garcia. The Guardian also carried Abbas Araki's warning that Starmer was putting British lives at risk. This matters because international law does not treat basing access as a neutral act. A state that allows its territory, runways, ports, or facilities to be used for belligerent operations risks moving from non-involvement into legal involvement, and the installations used for those operations may themselves become military objectives. That still does not make the whole supporting state a lawful target, but it does mean that it is no longer merely commenting on escalation from the outside. Signs of strain inside government. There were also signs of unease inside the government. Reuters reported an inquiry into a leak around the National Security Council meeting on the US request to use British bases. In Parliament, John Healey later confirmed that Britain had accepted a new US request to use RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia as the crisis escalated. He also told the Commons that British decisions had to rest on a legal basis. That matters because once ministers invoke legality, the issue is no longer only political. It turns on whether the underlying use of force is lawful under the UN Charter, whether any bases or facilities used for the operation may become military objectives, and whether British support could carry legal responsibility of its own if it helps enable an unlawful act. Diego Garcia makes the issue even more serious. A House of Commons library briefing makes clear how central the base is to British and US military strategy. Another Commons briefing on the 2025 Chagos Treaty shows why the wider sovereignty issue remains politically loaded. A further Commons briefing on the Diego Garcia military base and British Indian Ocean Territory bill underscores how contested the whole arrangement remains. So, when Britain opens Diego Garcia for another conflict, it does not project calm legitimacy. It revives older questions about dependency, sovereignty, and whether Britain still defaults too quickly to Washington in moments of crisis. A military choice with diplomatic costs. This is why the decision is not only a military one. It is diplomatic. Chatham House has warned that the Iran war is already feeding wider economic damage, while the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz has spilt into the Indian Ocean and widened the theater of risk. Britain had room to push harder for deconfliction, maritime security talks, and a clearer diplomatic path. Instead, Britain appears to have taken a more limited but still consequential path. It stayed out of the initial air campaign, yet moved closer to Washington through basing access, defensive support, and public alignment. That is not the same as joining the war outright, but it still makes claims of distance look less convincing. What the public actually thinks, public opinion makes the contradiction even harder to hide. Another YouGov survey found that a clear majority saw the US's reasons for attacking Iran as unclear. More Britons opposed than supported allowing the US to use UK airbases specifically for attacks on Iranian missile bases. Moreover, on the diplomatic line Britain should take, the largest group said the UK should neither praise nor condemn the US. In other words, the public does not seem convinced by the government's justification for British support, and it is certainly not asking to be edged quietly into another widening war. The larger lesson is simple. Modern wars are not defined only by who fires the missile. They are also defined by who provides access, logistics, basing, and political cover. Indeed, the UK is involved in supplying the architecture of force. From the Punic Wars to the Napoleonic blockade and the World Wars, states have always been judged not only by whether they fired the shot, but by whether they opened the port, supplied the fleet, financed the campaign, or provided political shelter. What is newer today is not the rule itself, but the speed, reach, and visibility of support. In an age of long-range strike, global basing networks, and instant surveillance, the line between attacker, enabler, and observer is harder to maintain in practice and harder to defend in public. Britain cannot claim the language of restraint while still providing part of the machinery through which force is applied. If PM Starmer truly wants to limit Britain's direct entanglement in a wider regional war, he should avoid decisions that move the country from political support into operational involvement. In geopolitics, intent matters, but function matters more. On that test, Britain is already closer to the war than its public language admits. Author, Dr. Usman, Geopolitics, Afghanistan, Central Asia, Regional Security, earlier publication, Different Approaches on Central Asia, Economic, Security, and Energy, Academic Fields, Geopolitics, International Relations, Security Studies. The views contained in this article are the author's alone.
This was the Horizon Audiofiles, a podcast of the Defense Horizon Journal. For more information, go to www.tdhj.org. Thank you for listening.